first novel, The Teahouse Fire, which came out from Riverhead in 2006, takes place in the tea ceremony world of 19th century Japan. I studied tea ceremony for 5 years, and early on I was confronted with the question, how come all the famous tea ceremony people in history were men, but all my fellow tea students were women? Tea used to be a samurai warrior's art, and now it's a women's art. What happened? I did some research and I discovered that there was a real woman from the most important tea ceremony family in Kyoto who single-handedly changed the fate of the art in the 1880s by getting tea into the curriculum of the newly founded girls' schools. Her name was Yukako, and she was the inspiration for one of my 2 heroines, Yukako Shin. In 1866, when Yukako is 16, she meets my other heroine, Aurelia, whom she renames Uriko. Aurelia is a Western child who gets separated from her missionary family on her first night in Kyoto. Yukako takes her in as a servant and surrogate younger sister. Though the narrator Aurelia is Yukako's first tea ceremony student, here I will read a passage where Yukako is teaching tea to her second student, a geisha named Koito, her former rival in love. That's a long story. But first, an explanation of a word often used in tea ceremony, temai. Yukako didn't use the words make tea when she talked about the whole choreographed ritual, the ceremony, and what we call tea ceremony. She actually used a word that sounded like hand and before, te and mai, temai. I need to practice temai. His temai is a little rushed. It meant the next point, as on a list, or maybe procedure, but without the bureaucratic coldness that clings to the word in English. So, here we are, 4 years after Aurelia's arrival in Japan with Yukako, Aurelia, and Yukako's student, Koito. All you need to know is that Aurelia's private name for Yukako's father, the tea master, is the mountain, and that Yukako has recently suffered a broken engagement to a man named Akio. Do you remember your temai? Yukako asked. Of course I did. I looked up. Koito sat opposite me, calm and expectant. Had she never seen a real Shin tea ceremony? Use these, Yukako said, passing a fan to each of us. I gasped. She sat in exactly the position her father used when giving lessons. Was I supposed to do temai? The hair rose on the back of my neck as I set my fan before me and recited the phrase that I had heard the mountain students use with him, the phrase Yukako had taught me to use before our play lessons in her room. Sensei, please be kind to me. Yukako set a fan in front of herself, and we bowed together. Then, as the mountain students did for one another, I turned my fan and my body toward Koito and bowed to her as well. Honored guest, please be kind to me. No, bow back this way, Yukako directed Koito. Don't sit like an entertainer. My skin prickled. That was the word that Akio, Yukako's ex-fiancé, had used when he told Yukako not to do temai. If we're going to do this, you need to forget all the temai you ever learned before. This is real Shin temai. Your fan goes here. Say this. Koito bowed. Thank you, sensei. Yukako passed me a silk tea cloth, the emblem of the host. Now tuck this into your sash and make tea for your kohai. Her voice was a bright blade. I backed my fan and my kneeling body out the door and flushed, finally understanding. Koito had asked Yukako to teach her Shin temai. Yukako wasn't stealing her father's tea things. She was stealing his art, his role, the very thing he and Akio had denied her. Her back was long and alert as she knelt on the teacher's mat. I saw in its firm line all her years behind the lattice during lessons, permitted to observe temai, but not to practice it. The tossing nights after Akio said no wife of his would do temai. All the secret, lonely lessons in her room with me, like a girl with her doll. Her hissed yes when we sat by the river. This was the bright blade in her voice. She would practice tea ceremony. She would teach it. She would be her father's heir and not wait to marry him. And if this life offered only her old rival to stamp her will on, then stamp she would. I heard the pleasure she took in calling Koito my kohai, my junior, my lesser in rank. Though an entertainer, Koito was the oldest, most beautiful among us, and she had what Yukako wanted, the means to support herself. But in this room, Yukako had blown a small bubble world where the woman she hated was the meanest among us. Now I saw. My dad and older sister knew exactly what she was doing. My hands shook as I folded the silk cloth into my waistband. I brought in the sweets, and then the utensils on their tray, and then the wastewater bowl. I wiped the tea box and scooped with the silk scarf, poured water in the tea bowl, swished the whisk in the water, and poured the used water away, wiping the bowl with the linen cloth. I added powdered tea, offered koito or senbei, and whisked hot water and green tea together into a foamy brew. I had done this temai so many times that Yukako did not correct me, but focused on her other charge. No, like this, like this. When she'd spoken to Koito before, she'd used polite though not obsequious language. But as soon as Koito bowed to her as sensei, she began using the short, imperious verbs she used with me. Chaimasu, a polite way for saying, it's different, became chow, you're wrong. Raise the sweet tray in thanks and set it down. Then set your paper pad before you. Wrong, fold side toward you. Touch the tray with your left hand. Wrong, palm up. Take your sundae with the right hand and set it on the paper. Wrong, first move the tray to the right. Wrong with both hands. Koito took Yukako's critiques with good humor and even eagerness. I understood. Though she'd spoken with more affection, Yukako had been just as stern with me, just as precise, and I had loved how carefully she'd watched me. Temai, though mysteriously affecting, was not mysterious. Each gesture took clear shape in the light of her attention. That day in Koito's garden room, not being critiqued, for the first time I felt while performing Temai something of the solemnity and grace I felt while watching it. I felt the austere precision of the choreography and my voluptuous surrender to it. I felt the desire to give something precious, this bowl of tea. I felt this one moment in all the world, 3 women in a room, doors thrown back to the bright day, the drunk bees and the irises. I felt the alchemy of food made flesh. We wore candles that burned rice and salt. These ground green leaves came from earth, water, light, and air, and so did my guest's drinking body. And I myself was a leaf, adrift, my own body borne down a river of Temai. I felt my mind both river and leaf.